Hello, welcome back to Pilgrims of Plunder. Today we're going to talk about a topic I'm interested in, and that is fear. In particular, I want to talk about with Greg, um, why do we not fear authority anymore? And I've been pondering this for a couple of years now. Just a quick intro. I realized several years ago that basic thing we read in the Bible, Old and New Testament, that we're called to fear God is something we don't do. The vast majority of Christians don't do and don't even understand. And I remember I had a preacher come to me once. He goes, like, look, I know it's in the Bible. I don't question the Bible, but I just don't get it. I love God. I love the triune God. I love Jesus. I don't fear him, and I don't get it. So I spent several years reading books, including some that Greg suggested, understanding the fear of God and trying to explain it to people. And I realized, and I've done videos for this on my channel, Simply Reformed. And the problem was we were calling it respect. Fear equals respect. And I think that's completely wrong, because when you make it respect, we have this notion that I will respect you if you earn my respect, which is the exact opposite of fear. And I've argued fear is more about concern. You should be concerned with this person's judgment because this person's over you. And in this video, I want to talk not necessarily about those details, but I wanted to give an intro. But I wanted to ponder, where did we get this culture that we no longer fear authority? Because to me, it's an epidemic thing. I mean, children don't fear teachers, children don't fear parents, wives don't fear their husbands, parishioners don't fear their pastor, citizens don't fear the magistrate. And let's be honest, no one really fears God. I mean, especially pagans and atheists don't, but I think even Christians wrestle with it. I mean, when's the last time you heard Joel Osteen preach a sermon that you had to fear God? So I
To be
want to talk
fair,
about the origins.
I
But
haven't heard a sermon from Joel Osteen ever. So
oh, you should just
I no
understand,
no no. I
just
think
where
I've
the
listened
vast
to a
majority of
couple.
Christians are at, and it's terrifying. Um, but any general thoughts about fear before we zip into the origins of
So
this
general
problem?
thoughts. And I want to emphasize the point you made about that difference, the distinction between fear and respect. Um, because all I don't know, off the cuff. Um, all respect. They they're not dissimilar necessarily,
Sure.
and
Yeah, 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 yeah.
they're
There is
not
an
mutually
aspect. Yeah,
exclusive.
true, true,
Um,
true.
However, you are right. Our our usage of respect, our understanding of respect, is improper. You know, even that notion that respect is earned, as you've said in the past, respect that's earned is by definition not respect.
Yeah,
You respect positions, you
yeah.
respect an office, you don't respect an individual. So respect is shown, even if, like, if for some reason we're not able to pin down what fear is. um Even if somebody wants to say, oh, it's respect, and I'm like, well, then you respect without condition.
Yeah.
And notably, of course, and the one we see that in the Christian community, the only time that it ever comes up is that love and respect, the whole marital advice. And everyone's all clear on love. Husbands love their wives unconditionally, but they don't put that same standard on wives respect your husbands
Yeah.
unconditionally. We
Yeah.
think that you can earn or lose respect. It's an emotional thing instead of an
And that
objective
word
thing.
respect in Ephesians really means?
Fear. Oh, and
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
Is the same Greek word at the beginning of that text of submit to one another in the fear of Christ. That's the
Yeah.
same word at the
Yep.
end of that section. And
Yep.
therefore, wives, fear your husbands. I know it gets translated to respect, though.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's a whole nother conversation to have
right.
about, because I mean, talk about, I think the passage that most pastors would be terrified to preach on is the notion that wives fear your husbands.
Right.
And I don't want to focus on that in particular
Right.
today, but it's that again, that just lack of fear of everything. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, though it's weird in a weird sort of way, as we have less and less fear for authority, we have more and more fear about everything else, and we're a very fearful culture. And I, like I said, pondering that, and I think the only place you see it is, unless you're in the military, which you could speak of better than I could, of course, is probably going to court. Recently, I've been to court a couple times, not for any crime I've committed, just as as a witness.
Clarify that one.
Clarifying, yeah. And I'm like, this is like the one institution you are afraid, you are concerned of the judge. You dress up, you change your language, you are deferential, you are very concerned what this guy can do, let alone getting the ruling you want. But if you overstep any bounds, you can throw you in jail for contempt of court.
Right.
I mean, there is that sense of this guy has power, this guy has authority, and you need to respect, be concerned, and fear that. I know you've told me stories in the military. What was it? Captain's mast?
Yeah, Captain's
Was
Mast.
it? I
Yep.
don't know if you want to describe that for the viewers. I thought that was fascinating.
Oh, well, yeah, Captain's Mast. So Captain's Mast, also known as the green tablecloth. Because that's there's a tablecloth. It's like green felt, and
Yep.
it gets put out on the table that
Yep.
at which the captain sits for Captain's Mast. Captain's Mast is the legal proceedings, if you will, by authority of the captain for a number of transgressions of the law within the context of the crew. So a captain has the authority, of course, to award punishments, as the term goes. And in there, yes, everybody's all sorts of very proper, again, because it's the military, you have to be. But they also invite in a decent section of the crew, a chunk of the crew, depending, given physical space. So if you're in port, you can fit more people in a room than you can in any space on the sub.
Right.
But Captain's Mast is also, witnessed by members of the crew, and then whatever punishments are awarded by the captain for that. And I mean, and it can go pretty bad. You can get kicked out. Ultimately, the captain has that kind of authority, and so you always, you're always mindful of that, which I think is really one of the underpinnings, because even your courtroom example, you are a law-abiding citizen, and so you understand and fear what a good judge will do and can do to those who violate the law. Hop over to California, where it's not even a matter of impotence, but just of willful neglect of duty and responsibility. There is no fear of the courts because there are no judgments in the courts. And I think that's really one of those main underpinnings, at least at one of the beginning points of fear, is harm or loss, which, if you do not view the magistrate as one who will harm you, and you do not view your situation as falling into that of loss because of your actions, then you will not have fear of that position of authority, either because the one who holds it is impotent, or because that position has been rendered impotent due to other legal or social statutes.
And again, the origins of that I think is interesting, because I realized, I think this is true, and be curious if you have any correction on it. There's going to be a fear in a relationship, in a hierarchical relationship. And when you destroy the fear and respect for authority, it's going to flip around the other direction. I think teachers are now very afraid of children in the classroom. I think parents sometimes are fear of their children. I remember Chocolate Knox on Cross Politics once quickly said, most husbands are afraid of their wives. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Right.
I think pastors are afraid of their parishioners. So there's going to be fear, but we have this weird thing that we've now flipped it around. And the people in authority now need to be afraid of those who are subordinate to them.
Right.
And that's crazy world. And would you agree with that as a generalization?
Yep. Yeah. And it's not even directly, I mean, because the magistrate being expected to fear the people. So there are two ways to come across for that.
Yeah.
because either you have in the lawful structure, you have a republic or a democracy,
Yeah.
in which the belief is the people have authority and their leaders derive authority from the people. And I think that this is, of course, unjustifiably stupid. Um,
We need to talk about that.
however,
Step on some landmines.
However, the other one is that the fear of the people rebelling.
Yeah.
In which case, you have that fear with the things of, teachers fearing children. Teachers fear children not necessarily because of what the children can do, though
Right.
there are instances in which students now have actually, harmed their
Yeah.
teachers,
Yeah.
attacked them, assaulted them, so on and so forth. But because the authority over a teacher, their administration, favors the children more than the teacher.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. You're right.
and so like you still have a hierarchy. It's just that the hierarchy is corrupt.
Yep.
And so, you're more worried that your boss is going to fire you because you didn't pander to whomever.
Right.
Um,
No, I think it's a good distinction because again, yeah, it's not in the sense of fear that, the second grader is going to go beat up the teacher
right.
physically. That's not a fear.
You may get
But
shot. That happened to
but
someone
if
in
the but
Florida.
if the student at all complains or make any charges, like, you dare grab the child by the shoulder and like shake him and like, hey, pay attention,
Right.
that lose your job and also maybe end up in jail.
Right.
And that of course is a very new concept. And so that fear of what the child could do
Mhm.
is what I'm driving at.
Yes.
And I do want to go down the classical liberal route because I think a lot of this comes from leftism, that desire to make everything equal, whether it's socialism or communism from the 19th century, that, it starts with economics, that the proletariat, the workers need to rise up against the bourgeoisie. The many
Right.
must rise up against the few.
Right.
And therefore, the elites need to be in fear that the people can come and take over. And of course, when you see that expanded into cultural communism, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, that you apply it to the social realm.
Christian nationalism.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second because the classical
They just
liberal
tacked
argument is
Jesus
interesting.
onto their revolution.
But the notion that certain races should be afraid of other races because you have to have equity, that we need to teach men how to fear women, we need to teach teachers how to fear children.
Right.
That mentality that was applied to just economics spills over now in woke ideology to really all different aspects of society. And we want those people who used to be, quote, in power, have fear. And yeah, I mean, those things are different. I understand race, gender, whatnot, things, but I think the thing that's caused it the most is this leftism, is this woke ideology, that sees oppressor, sees the lens of history, everything from everything through the lens of oppressor and oppressed, and therefore we have to flip it. And obviously, oppression in the biblical sense is bad. I mean, to have a bad ruler is a bad thing.
Right.
You have a husband abuse his wife, that's a bad thing. There needs to be justice. But to see the lens, everything through that it's systemic, it's natural, that there's this horrible abuse, and therefore we have to change it all. I think that's probably the major origins of this lack of fear for authority. I mean, obviously, atheism's in there too, because if you don't fear God, in the end, you don't fear no authority. But
Right.
I'm rambling. What do you think is the main cause?
No.
Though there are going to be several.
Right. And there are, I think the main cause, of course, is you roll it all the way back to the garden. The temptation was to be like God. You shall surely not die. You shall be as God.
Mm.
And it is the sin of the devil, that rebellion, which
Yeah.
was the temptation of man and the fall of man, which is rebellion. And it's not in so much to be rebellious against existing authority. It is to be the authority, the desire to be God. I think is
Sure.
really that underlying, because the masses desired to be the magistrate.
Right.
And now you can, to be fair, like you can trace these back to, if you will, good intention or response to some sort of abuse. And so like an easy one is, you know, the great minds at the time, they go, something's very wrong about the divine right of kings. That's an abuse. So to correct the divine right of kings, we're going to say authority is derived from the masses, which will solve the problem that kings think that they have the literal authority of God. So it was an attempt in a secular way to correct some
So,
abuse of authority. And
so
so you can kind of look at it and go, oh, well, you know, there was a good intention. It was a bad solution to a bad problem, much like feminism. Feminism's a
mhm.
bad solution to a bad problem, because the solution to actual oppression and destruction from men isn't feminism, it's Christianity. And so the correction to the divine right of kings isn't communism, you know, or democracy or a republic. It's Christianity, because the divine right of kings is not derived from Christianity. It's a way of those few
Well,
who do attempt to use religion to, you know, control the masses.
I would. I'm sorry.
But yeah,
I would agree in the big picture.
right.
Obviously, it goes back to the garden. It goes back to sin. It goes back to a lack of fear of God, which is always, in one sense, has always been a problem.
Right.
So I think throughout most of human history, and I'm old enough to remember, back in the ancient days of maybe the 70s, um, that there was still a sense of respect and fear for authority.
Yes.
That still existed. So, in one sense, the big problem has always been around. I get that.
Right.
But there's definitely something really, I think, twisted about our current culture. And where did that in particular come from?
A
Because
lack of
non-Christian,
justice.
what?
Lack of justice.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
obviously, we've hit upon different things. Again, I think in its extreme form that caused it in the modern sense, I think it is leftism, and which is atheistic. I mean,
right.
if you don't fear God and you have a focus of yourself, you have a tremendous sense of entitlement. That's if you think you're a victim and you're entitled, you are not going to have fear of authority, and so that's a huge problem. So
Right.
I think in the narrow sense, it does have a very modern thing, but you hit upon something that I've wondered is the roots of that, and we're going to hit some sacred, talk about some sacred things, is actually based more on classical liberalism. Leftism is the cancer fully taken off, and it's a
Right.
horrible, horrible thing. But in classical liberalism, that focus on liberty and freedom did a little bit of that already creep in. Again, the notion that the government should be afraid of the people. And in one sense, I'm an American, I'm a Congregationalist. I kind of like that. I kind of like the concept that the government should have some concern about the people, because I want the government to be checked on some level. But is that actually a biblical thing? And did that good political theory that came out of, I would argue, the Reformation, some would argue the Enlightenment, does that lead to the problem?
I mean, it's just it's centralized versus decentralized tyranny.
Yeah.
Which is why, so yes, to your specific concern, why is it that a constitutionally governed republic, the US, and a more whatever England has, they have a simple democracy slash,
Constitutional democracy.
but yeah, they have a constitutional democracy. They don't have whatever. They
Well, they
borrowed
they
that
have
from
an
us.
unwritten constitution. Yeah, that's a long
Right,
story.
right. They borrowed that from us. So we got it right. So
Read your
why
budget. Sorry.
why the
Tangent.
decline in Western civilization? Again, it was a slower decline than had you had kings and all your kings ended up being evil. And
Right.
then you could question, well, why was King George evil? why did whatever fail? It's like, well, the state failed because its leadership failed, because its leadership is evil. If you have a democracy, your democracy will be evil when your people are evil. I think a lot of that shift, and from the glory days where people still feared authority, it's the fear of traditional authority. People still fear authority.
So
It's just where they believe the authority is.
so
Because
that's
you
sorry.
fear the authority of the mob. You'll notice that's what happens. So corporations fear the mob, individuals fear the mob, governments fear the mob. So there is authority. And there is fear of that authority. There are some things you don't say online because you are afraid that the mob is going to gang up on you, draw attention, you'll get, deplatformed or whatever. So it's that the authority has been seized by the masses.
So would you disagree then, as I'm working out this theory, that yes, leftism, that militant leftism, that's the real problem. But if you try to strip away to the onion, as you try to get more to the core, you shouldn't directly blame classical liberalism or some form of liberalism. I mean, to give you an example, obviously the United States, rebelled against the authority of the crown in the 18th century. But if you go and, if you read, the colonial New Englanders, they tremendously have a sense of respect for authority and for power. This is before the American Revolution, but I was at Salem a few years ago. I went to the Witch Museum, and they did, the famous, there's a statue reenactments in this one room, and it goes back to the 70s. And they have this great line where they bring the witches before the magistrates, and the magistrate has this line, "You are before authority." And I'm like, I was very struck by that line because that's such a powerful line. And so you had this beginning of this classical liberal society in New England, but they tremendously had the sense of authority. Now, I'm not for the Salem witch trials, that was unjust. But I'm rambling here, but so would you disagree that classical liberalism is the root? It's something else?
I I mean, I feel that classical liberalism is a byproduct of the problem. I know that
Okay.
it makes it easy to go back to the garden, but the underlying issue of why any system fails is because of sin. So liberalism, again, they may sound good, they may be good, they may be superior to other forms of whatever, but they're going to fail because they have no foundation. The authority, the respect of authority, is either, well, it is still fear, non-Christian or Christian. Yes, non-Christians can fear authority. You fear a
Sure.
pagan king because the
Sure.
pagan king will kill you for violating his law.
Sure.
Um, so it's not to say I don't
I
see,
guess
but that gets at a different point, though.
to
Hold on,
sorry.
because there's a
Yeah.
difference between fearing an authority and
Mm,
therefore obeying, and loving the authority and therefore obeying.
mm,
Because the Christian response to authority is obedience through love. The
mm.
pagan response to authority is obedience through fear. And obedience through fear lasts only so long before the people rise up, or the entirety of society just implodes and disappears, because those are really your kind of two options. It all burns, or it gets, some revolution happens. um I think
Or the
think
dictator.
you can maintain a lawful society longer when you have a majority Christian, because
Oh, sure.
Christians love
Sure.
God and
Sure.
want to obey his law. So it'll last longer. However, the society itself, the fear of that authority, even just on a base, on a base level, is only going to last so long. And the problem with liberalism is when you start to introduce equality, you then end up with equity. diversity, equity, inclusion. And equity
Yeah.
is everybody gets to look over the fence, no matter
Well,
how tall they are, because you just get different height boxes. It's the equality of outcome is
yeah.
the problem. But you ended up with equality of outcome because you gave a non-Christian secular concept of equality to begin with. That's the problem, because within Christianity, there is equality. When you remove the Christianity, you remove the check and the
Yeah.
context of that equality.
Sure.
And then you give it over to the authority of the people, magistrate or the masses. And then they come up with their own contexts for what that equality means and how it should be enforced. So yeah, I don't disagree. Liberalism, classical liberalism, um, may not be the cause, but it was the early stages.
Because I know, I mean, it's like, okay, among like I think Christian nationalists, and I emotionally have this response too, and there's a strange hypocrisy here. It's like, look, I want children to fear their parents. I want students to fear their teachers. I want parishioners to fear the church elders and fear God, but I want the government to fear the people.
Right. Right.
And
We'll
now,
just
I mean,
abandon it right there at the end.
yeah, yeah. So it's like, well, wait a minute. Now, again, you can make the argument, as you hinted before. Well, the government, the Constitution puts the government with the people, and so, I mean, you can make that argument, but again, you wonder, is that's the creeping door? And it's interesting because I've had like Roman Catholic friends argue. They might make the argument. It's like, well, it really starts with the Reformation, that you have this individual sense of being justified by faith and faith alone, which obviously I strongly believe in, is clearly
Right.
teaching the scripture.
Right.
But that starts this individual concept. And I think a little individualism, I mean, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Congregationalist, is a good thing. And I do think the political system that comes out of the Reformation is a beautiful thing.
Right.
But you're right. It's that, I think it's that Christianity element that keeps it all going, because in the end there's the fear of God. Because
Right.
what's the supreme check when you're in authority for misusing your authority? That there will be judgment.
Right.
That God will judge.
Right.
And I mean, for pastors, James 3:1, there's a higher standard for those who teach. I don't know what that means exactly. Like, someone asked me, well, are you not justified by faith alone like everyone else? I'm like, yes, but I've been warned.
Right.
And so that, and okay, I got the warning, the
Yep.
king gets the warnings, people.
Yep.
And so that I do think, obviously, I think atheism has roots in this. I do think leftism, I think classical liberalism, maybe a little, but not directly, but it can quickly become an idol.
Mm-hmm.
And once classical liberalism becomes a thing unto itself, I think that's the problem. I know I've been doing some reading into the origins of Congregationalism, and I think that's, you see that with the fall of the Congregational tradition, that it was founded upon Christ and Scripture and these beautiful things, and then it tacked on some concepts of freedom to it, which are beautiful. But in the 18th century, it flipped, and
Right.
the liberty became the more important thing, and then Christ becomes optional extra, and then why not wander off eventually into leftism?
Right.
So,
Right. And even going back, because again, there's that distinction which needs to be continuously made. The Reformation wasn't the issue. The civil adaptation of concepts from the Reformation was the issue. Because again, the state is not the church. The state will
Right.
never be the church.
Right.
Because and to counter the Roman Catholic criticism of Protestantism, their church is in a pretty bad state of things as well, and they
Right.
didn't have the Reformation. So
Right.
it wasn't our fault that Western society collapsed, because the Roman Catholic Church is just as messed up as a lot of Protestant denominations are. The issue, even with the Protestant Reformation, is that was a reformation of the church. It was not a reformation of the state. The civil byproduct of anything from the Reformation, good or bad, is secondary. And if the Reformation of the church changed nothing about the civil state, so be it.
Right.
The problem is when we want to start trying to say, The church is whatever. Let's mirror that into civil society.
Right.
You're missing the point. You're robbing from the church at that point. The church is to be governed under the fear of God, and a part of that commandment is submission unto the civil magistrate. And if your magistrate is the wicked and evil Caesars, you submit to them. And if it's a horrible Anglican king or queen who's well, no, sorry, Mary was Roman Catholic. Henry was Anglican. When Queen Mary starts executing all of you, you go to the gallows and to the pyre, I guess. I think it was more fire was more her deal. But so you submit to that authority because you're the church and you are governed by the laws of God. The secular state, and I guess this is kind of the thing, the laws of God are not a sacrament because they pertain to the church. It's not, you can look at the church anyone can look at and say, this king is evil because he's violating God's moral law.
Right.
But he's pagan. Pagans are going to pagan, right? The greater critique, which we read in Revelation, is Christ is speaking to the churches, right? Christ is evaluating the churches. He's not evaluating the kings. He didn't, and unto the kings of these nations, he said, unto the messengers, the angels, the pastors of these churches. So, the judgment upon the civil world, the civil magistrate, is the authority of the King of Kings. We are to live governed by our head, the husband. We are to live governed by our high priest, the ecclesiastical authority. And we are to submit to civil authority because Christ has appointed them.
Yes.
The issue is when you start to try to make, or even, and I'll go this far, even hold civil society to the standards of the church. There is they are evil when they violate God's law. But
what does that have to do with fear?
We the people, what does that have to do with fear? The fact that I started ranting about church and state structuring?
Yes.
I'm
sorry, I didn't mean just.
No. I was going somewhere with that, and then I got off on that. Christians fear civil authority because God is the ultimate authority.
Right.
Civil society should not be expected to ever fear civil authority because, again, there's no fear of God. That civil authority.
I'm not sure I agree with you on this one. Yeah. So wait.
I don't know. I was just talking. I might not agree with it either.
No. Because obviously we do have to do a podcast about Christian nationalism, or and we have to ponder that one. But the pagan is going to, by nature, is called to also fear correct authority. And
everyone's right.
And throughout, I cannot think of a civilization that's ever trying to do what we're trying to do.
That's because by definition, they're not a civilization.
Yeah.
As Augustine says, if as soon as you no longer have law, you lose the right to call yourself a civilized society.
Yeah.
Societies are defined by their legal systems. If you dissolve your legal system, you are no longer a society.
Right.
And so there's no such thing.
And if I could change do you mind if I change the conversation just a little? Because there's
go ahead.
There's one thing I want to get at related to this. So I think I would generally agree. I'm not going to blame the Reformation for this twisted sense of fear we have in our culture. Probably not classical liberalism, though that can be an idol that can be easily used to bring in something more dangerous. Obviously, atheism is going to have a twisted view of fear, which is not surprising that leftism does that. That we've upended, the concept of fear. But gonna throw get myself a little more trouble with this next one. I've also wondered from leftism, a particular branch of leftism is feminism, and that putting women more and more into places of power, we've changed the concept of fear. And we've developed a culture that doesn't want to have any fear of authority. And run with my thinking here.
Okay.
Women by nature want to feel protected and provided for,
Right.
which is appropriate. And that
Right.
is a good and godly thing. They desire that. That's what they look for in a future husband. They expect their husband to provide those things. And amen, amen, amen. They are the fair and they are the weaker sex.
Right.
But but women by nature, I think, as a generalization, they don't enjoy that concept of fearing authority as much as men. They might understand submission better, not rebellion. I mean, you always, generally, what's the old saw, in high school, the girls listen better than the boys in gym class.
Right.
However, what was that? What was it? Kubrick's movie, Full Metal Jacket, which was this, hardcore anti-war movie. And when played down south, more men wanted to join the Marine Corps when they saw it. They're like, "Yeah, I
Absolutely.
want that."
Yep.
I want
Because it was a
Armitrell
very accurate
screaming at
depiction.
me because that's what men do. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, and there's that desire for that authority, for to have that sense, I fear authority. And I wonder, because women don't want to feel that, they're more allergic to that. They want to be protected from that. When you put women more and more in places of authority and leadership, you're going to develop structures that are going to try to avoid that or mitigate that. Hence HR departments, which are now rampant throughout most corporations, which never existed, or on any major level, since the rise of feminism. So I wonder if feminism is also part of the issue. What do you think?
Um, I think again, it gets yes. I think one of the contributing aspects to it is as soon as a woman is no longer dependent upon a man for provision and protection,
Hmm.
because the state will provide for her and protect her,
Hmm.
she no longer has to fear consequences. You're not afraid to not be married. You're not afraid to offend your husband. You're not afraid um, to dishonor or disrespect, because there's no chance of suffering loss.
Hmm.
There's no consequence within the marriage for the woman. In fact, it's the exact opposite. In divorces favor women, especially when children are involved, finances, so on and so forth. A single woman can uh, can exist. The concept of a single woman exists, which is just contrary to everything as far as history is concerned. So when there is no sense of loss or consequence, there is no restraint of fear, because what are you afraid of? And so again, and feminism gave that to women. It gave them the independence, the individuality. Um, from that you derive, positions of authority and control and power, which then also alleviate even more any sense of fear. Um,
But you
and
know
the
what? Sorry.
problem with all of that, to your point, is it's unnatural.
Yeah.
And it was the response to isolated, or it was it was a human response to something that is god-given fear of bad things happening
Mm.
drives us to God and
Yeah.
to the structures and systems, the ordinary means of God's extraordinary grace. God has given us families for a reason, to provide and to protect and so on and so forth. Um, when you do not have God and you still have those fears, am I going to be able to eat tomorrow? Um, you then look for other solutions, secular solutions as well, which the secular solution is, of course, always going and doing that which is right in your own eyes, which is that which appeals to you as an individual. And so you as an individual will be self-sustaining.
But not just feminine. I guess my point, just I agree with what you're saying. It's not just that feminism causes this twisted notion of fear, but it's also putting women in positions of authority and
Right.
positions in power, even if they're not, say they're let's say they're not a feminist in the narrow militant sense, but when you put women in leadership, they're going to try to create a system where there's going to be as less fear as possible, even good fear, because of their nature and their approach to reality. And again, in the right place, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But in a more in the outside world, more aggressive world, does that lead to bad things? Like for instance, like I remember in seminary, one of my favorite professors, some of my favorite professors, they were blunt. They were like, I remember one professor, first day of class at seminary, and he said, "Look, you've heard it said that there are no bad questions. That's not true in my class. Do not waste my time or your fellow students' time by asking stupid questions." And my response was like, "Yeah, this is awesome, because this is something elite. This is something advanced. This is
Right.
going to be challenging. I'm excited." I've told that story to several women, and I've never heard a woman have the same response. Now, many women are smarter than I am. It's not an issue of intelligence,
Right.
but it's that the woman doesn't want to hear that. That sense, oh, I need to fear this teacher and engage. No, no, I don't want that. And I wonder if part of our problem in our culture, that we've had this weird, inverting of what fear should be, is because we've put women in places of power and authority.
Right. So then in other words, it's that matter of um risk equals the potential of harm. Harm is scary and bad. Eliminate risk to eliminate the scary bad harm.
Yeah.
And so if you bubble wrap everything because you're loving and you don't want anyone ever to get hurt, then that's somehow a good thing. But that is, again, from your perspective, a distinctly female response to tragedy, to harm, so on and so forth.
Huge generalizations.
Yeah.
And by the way, again, I'm not trying to bash women. There's a definitely place for that. That's a virtue in the correct place. What you were describing
Right.
in the general sense. But if that is a trait more that women, it's one of their strengths, and you put that now in places of leadership, of headship,
Right.
does that not affect things? That's what I'm wondering.
Right.
It's a working
Right.
theory. I'm not saying I'm true. It's true. But what do
Right.
you think? There's some validity to that way of thinking?
Yeah. I will agree to that. Most, again, most, even just if you just look at the trivial, sports, sports which include a very high chance of pain,
Hmm.
are predominantly male dominated.
Yeah.
And the female equivalents of those sports are objectively less entertaining, which is also why they make a
Yeah.
lot less money. The sport draws in a lot less money. It's because a part of the excitement of watching somebody snowboard is the risks taken.
Yeah.
If you're going to cautiously snowboard, it's boring. You've defeated the purpose of the sport. Um, because the point of it is the insane adrenaline. And so yes, that would be, again, a very simple thing of that. Um, I mean, yes, and it being a working, a working theory as well. It is that, there is that scripture from the prophet that women and children are your leaders and they are destroying your paths. The fact
Hmm.
that you have literal women or emasculated men and literal children or immature men in
Mm.
positions of leadership is a cause of the destruction of the people, and it is a judgment of God. So, um, are women less people? Absolutely not. Are women inferior to men in certain areas? Yes. And
And the
are men
reverse being true.
inferior
Yeah,
to women in areas? Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
There is no equality.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of equality even between men. If you want to get, depending on how granular you want to get into it. But generalizations, yes. And are men therefore by design more suited to be in positions of authority? Yes.
And to understand, I guess I'm saying the concept in the good sense of fear, to fear authority. And again, it's not, and
Right.
I don't mean understand, because obviously a godly woman can understand fearing authority.
Right.
I guess the thesis I'm working on is when you put women in positions of power, in positions of authority, there's going to be desire to, again, to mitigate that concept of fear.
Do they undermine their own authority then?
I think in some ways,
Because
yeah,
if a
yeah,
man
yeah,
in
yeah.
authority, a man in authority will enforce the system, the
Mhm.
structure. Now, again, we're speaking. Yes,
Yeah,
there are corrupt men in authority, and they
sure, sure.
abuse all things. Like I get that.
Yeah.
We're just saying, by design. Um, so if a man in authority has no problem with fearing of authority, that will continue to maintain a civilized society, an established order. You correct people who deviate from whatever, you punish people who are deserving of punishment. A good king, pagan or non, Christian or pagan king, will enforce the law. And that will encourage the fear of the king. That will encourage a civil society. Is then the next theory that if a woman is in authority, and we should read that John Knox book. If a woman is in authority,
Like, first
um,
blast of the trumpet. Anyway,
right,
anyways, right.
right. If a woman is in
Uh,
authority, will she mess up the
well, no, yeah.
the will she mess up the hierarchy and fear and enforcement? Is
Well,
and not just women, but even effeminate men. Because let's let's
sure,
let's
sure,
let's
sure, sure,
include let's
sure, sure.
include feminized men, because there are a lot of men who
Well,
aren't men.
so in other words, to give an example, and again, these are again broad generalizations. In the 19th century, if you got a job and you went in and you're just low level, and you're Jimmy Olsen, and you go see Perry White. Perry White can rip into you. Shut up, kid. Do this. And you start barking orders.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I'm just the journeyman. I'm like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Of course, sir. I mean, you take that.
Yep.
Now, I mean, I suppose you go quit and go find your own newspaper. If you want to do that, that's fine too. I mean, that,
Sure.
as long as within the confines of law and godliness, sure, no problem. But there's a clear sense that those in authority can speak with authority, enforce their will, and those underneath it just need to, well, let's use the phrase, man up.
Yep. Just suck it up. Carry
But
on.
if be a man, if you go away crying, it's like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
Learn what it is to be a man,
Right.
and work hard and build up, and then you become the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet.
Yep.
To go with our Superman analogy here. But
Yeah, no, run with it. That's good.
yeah, but Lois Lane,
Uh-huh.
but when you put women in there, unless go full Superman, unless they act a lot like men, like
Yep.
Lois Lane, or if you force them and encourage them by society to be there, they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, he shouldn't yell at me. That's inappropriate leadership. We
Right.
need to create this thing called HR, human resources.
Right.
So if I feel intimidated, if I feel threatened, I can go to HR and have HR go after Perry White, and Perry White's going to get in all sorts of trouble because he was mean and aggressive to me.
Right.
And now you have the situation where Perry is going to be afraid of Jimmy Olsen.
Right.
because of the HR department. I think that's what I'm driving at.
Yes. And you've also now undermined quality.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you've removed the ability to weed out the weak ones,
yeah,
who are also going to be those who aren't going to be able to adhere to a demanding standard of performance, you now allow anyone and everyone in. You've taken what was a meritocracy. You're in because you're good.
Yeah.
And you've made it everyone can be in and no one can ever be out. You'll have absolute you'll have modern America.
Or the New York Times,
or the New York Times,
where the editors are terrified. The
Right.
people in charge of the paper are terrified of all the young little college students running around because they've been taught in leftist ideology.
Right. And no, and you're, and you hit on something very very true. And I was actually just thinking of this the other day. I was kind of reminiscing, if you will, about the military, which is also no longer the military. From all reports that I have, all branches have also gone just as awfully woke. But it was that matter of who has the right to say what to you.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking back to it, and you have, if someone outranks you, they have every right to harass you, to haze you, as it is in the military.
Yeah.
Hazing comes from superiors. And what's interesting is that there's no problem with that. Being the recipient of a superior picking on you, I am all for. I have no problem with. I've been on that receiving end, and both in the military and then immediately after in the civilian world, because I was working with a lot of veterans. And so it was actually kind of funny finding a civilian job where in my first couple weeks, I was getting played the same way. And I had to laugh. I'm like, those were really good pranks. So, but that's acceptable and that's fine. Also, you have the ability to yell at people, whoever is above you, because that's that. Peers messing with you, that's earned, I'd have to say. If somebody's going to yell at you or speak to you that way, they're not your superior, then they better be a close friend, because most peers don't have that authority. And subordinates never have any right to ever say or do anything because they're inferior to you. And this was the understood social structure.
Yeah.
And it worked really, really, really well. And this is even on submarines, which is very not military structurally by rank, because there's such a small population.
Yeah.
So rank, actually on the sub, rank is of less importance than qualification. An unqualified, higher ranking person is viewed lower than a lower ranking qualified. So if you have your submarine qualifications,
ensigns.
Right. Oh, well, that happens anyway. But to that, even even your E7s and E8s begrudgingly respect the O1s.
Sure.
Because they outrank them. And now, granted, it's a different story behind closed doors, but but you will, you still do that because that's how things go.
Remember the rules.
And the military under that functions well. When you remove that, when you make it safe spaces and coddling.
And you have to do that with women.
Oh, you do. You have to do that with women for two reasons. One, because they demand it. In inappropriate ways, they shouldn't be there anyway. And two, and this is the one point that I agree on the problem, I disagree on the solution. It's inappropriate to treat a woman that way.
Yeah.
But the solution isn't change the culture. It's don't let women in. Because that culture is necessary there.
So you agree that twisted notion of fear. Now you're going to have, is it a commander or full captain's in charge of a missile boat? Commander?
Well, I mean, you can be right. Your captain can be a commander or a captain.
But either one.
You can have an O something or O something.
Whatever those numbers
you can have a silver leaf captain or a bird captain.
Gotcha.
Right.
But I mean, the captain. I mean, in World War II sub, you have some able-bodied seamen. he's not going to be afraid of some able-bodied seaman.
Oh my
You make
goodness, no.
you make the able-bodied seaman a woman.
Oh yeah. Well, now because he only has authority up until it hits the bureaucracy
Yep.
and the
And
politics.
and so therefore,
Yep.
he's going to be trained on some level to be afraid of the enlisted people. Again, not in the
Right.
sense that the enlisted person is going to go beat him up, but
Oh, right,
because
right, right.
of the culture. And
Yes.
I know, like, I mean, I was in the Navy, but I read someplace recently, because it was a big thing for Navy guys when you cross the equator or something in the order of
Shell back.
Neptune or
Yeah.
whatever. And I've seen pictures from the 40s and 50s,
Oh,
what
you
that
get beat.
involved.
Yeah.
Oh my.
You get beat.
And I guess now it's like optional, and you sign a waiver, and it's and it's really toned down to what they used to do to go through. Is the order of Neptune?
Right. It was shell backing or turtle back
Yeah, yeah,
is the ritual where you get hit a lot
yeah.
during the crossing of the equator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was to prove now you're becoming one of the, well, men.
Right. Right. Oh no, absolutely. It was a rite of passage.
Yeah, and that's now fundamentally changed, if
Yes.
not gone away.
Yes. That started when I was in. I
Yeah.
mean, those things went on, but underground. It was we're gonna do this. Nobody's gonna talk about it. It
Yeah.
wasn't public necessarily. Like, getting your dolphins tacked on when you get
Yeah,
your
yeah.
fish and then you get hit. So you can't do that as a matter of public process any longer. Like, they used to straight up tack on your dolphins in the dolphin ceremony,
Yeah.
when they do that. You can't do that. But when everybody passes you in the halls subsequently, you get punched a lot. And you want that. That's
Yeah,
that's the thing.
because you're a submariner, you are
Right.
better on
Right.
some level.
That's the
I'm
whole point.
assuming that's gone away with on modern subs.
Oh, I'm sure that that's most likely absolutely gone away with.
Yeah.
If it happens, it would probably only happen in a very narrow cases among people you can trust. Because, and that's the other thing, nobody can, it's all thought crime, and everybody just turns you over to the police, so you can't trust anybody anymore anyway. But yes, that was also, and again, the feminization of a culture has feminized men, and so now you actually have men in the military who want the same feminized protections and coddling. So it's no longer a matter that women want to be treated like women, but yet somehow rewarded like men. It's that there are men who now have been treated like women their whole lives, and they expect that that's normal. So they still also are very sensitive and very weak. And it's like with the immune system. If you never get sick, your immune system's going to get weak, and you're going to die from anything. And so when you grow up a man raised as a woman, you never harden up. And so the first time you ever run into any real challenge in life, you're destroyed. You have no ability to handle or cope with reality, because your reality has been a sterile environment. And so the military now also treats men like women, and they have come to expect that and demand that. And then their marketing campaigns recruit those people anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, it's the military has become completely emasculated anyway, because masculinity is toxic.
Question, a little bit on a tangent. I'm just curious. I don't disagree with you. How do you know that? How do you know it's become that emasculated? I mean, my sense is it is, but
Reading, because I keep up on military news.
yeah.
And so there's a lot of news, there's a lot of publications, again, and it may also be it's so scary reading 1984 and then living through 1984.
Right.
It may be the 1984 effect, where you have to pretend in order to survive.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's standing there holding their arms up, screaming during the whole 1 minute of hate. Is that what that was from that book? I think it was the minute of hate, whatever.
Yeah.
Like this mass event where everyone is in unison, thinking and believing the same thing.
Yeah.
But of course, our narrator disagrees with all of it, and
Yeah.
come to find out, a number of people do as well.
Sure.
The thing is that you're not allowed to know other people don't believe it, because you're all expected to profess belief in it. So I
'Cause you're
will say
afraid.
that the perception of the military culture is very feminized. Now, whether or not all men in the military are genuinely feminized, I doubt that.
Yeah.
I will definitely doubt that. The same way that the 50% of the US population, which is male, for as feminized as we are, unwittingly so, we're not all on board with it, but
Yeah.
we can't say anything about it.
And we're
So,
afraid.
right. Oh, no, exactly. The men are afraid of the
We
women.
are afraid
Right,
of we're afraid of this authority. And again,
right,
it's the twisted thing. We are afraid, as a pastor, you are afraid of the congregants.
right,
And because if you say the wrong thing, you're going to get crucified. Now that doesn't justify cowardice by any sense
right.
of the imagination, but it's to me it's flooded across all aspects of society. So again, I wanted to talk about in this episode, where does this twisted notion of fear come from? Because we're called in the scriptures clearly to fear authority. And throughout all our lives, there's times where we're in authority and we're responsible, and other times we're subordinate. And obviously, we're all subordinate under God. We should fear the Lord. But we have such a hard time understanding that concept of fear because it's been removed from our culture. And there's no really, you can't really point to something except for maybe the court system, but even that's getting twisted.
Hmm.
And it's because of our culture. And I think we have this notion, for lack of a better word, we've become we've become woke, we've become feminized. We don't think we should be afraid of those who are in authority, but those in authority should be afraid of us.
Right,
And that is a twisted society to live in.
right,
And it actually
right.
makes us more cowardly. It's a
Yes,
weird thing.
yes, and the correct response is not masculine aggression,
Yeah. No.
but Christianity, because like in our one of our previous videos about Christian masculinity,
Yeah.
it's not about punching each other because you're
Yeah.
guys, though there's nothing wrong with punching each other because you're guys.
Yeah.
Um,
Boxing.
right. Being merciful, being meek and forgiving and patient and loving, and those are good Christian things, and Christian men ought to do and be those things. But within the context of Christianity, a man can be merciful and patient and wise
Yeah.
and submit to authority
Yep.
and be authoritative
Yeah.
and correct and admonish. And that's the thing. Christian love does not abrogate admonition, to be all super fancy. Being a loving Christian does not mean you no longer enforce moral law among the brethren. If you see that your brother is sinning, you approach him and you correct him on it. If you happen to actually be an authority, an elder or a deacon, you are accountable for
Yeah.
the congregation and you have authority over the congregation. You have the obligation to be loving, and an expression of Christian love within the church is to correct, is to call to repent, and is to excommunicate should the offending brother not repent. So there is the establishment of authority, the enforcement of authority, the fear of authority
Yeah.
within the context of Christian love and mercy and compassion.
Yeah.
When you go into the civil world, the pagan world, the secular world, and you want the kindness, mercy, charity, long suffering, you think the only way to achieve that is through the neutering of those in authority. If they don't have power, then they can't hurt me because that's scary, which really just leads to licentiousness, because now there's no correction. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And then you end up with all of this. So the correction, the Christian response isn't this weird masculine movement. Let's all go be,
Yeah.
cigar smoking, beer drinking men. no problem with beer or cigars or men, but that's not how you
Yeah.
defeminize a society. Christianity is the correction. So if you're a Christian man who's frustrated with the feminization of the Western world, go and proclaim the gospel. Don't drink more beer and smoke more cigars. That's not how you fix things.
Fear the Lord.
As
It's
therapeutic as a beer and a cigar may be, you're not fixing anything.
so,
um,
um,
yeah,
it's been an hour, so
it sure has been. It's been more than
so I think this was helpful. We wandered around a bit, but it is something
uh,
that's been on my mind. And again, you're trying to teach fear, how to teach the correct concept of fear, but also where the problem comes from.
right.
I've been pondering that more. So those are my thoughts. I'm all set. I don't know. Do you have any
My
last
closing
thoughts?
thoughts again was just that, again, because the Christian response to a secular problem, Christian response to a moral problem must be the gospel. The Christian response to moral secular issues should never be secular solutions.
Right.
That just, it adds more problems. Um, so yeah, that's my in closing, I suppose.
Well,
um,
we
but
did
yeah,
this with masculine when we did, I think, the issue on masculinity. Again, that great line, 1 Corinthians 16:13, be on alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love.
right.
So,
Yep.
fear the
Amen to
Lord.
that.
So, well, thank you for
All right.
joining in with
Thank
Pilgrims of
you.
Progress, and I'll hope to see you. I'll see you. That's an old line. Hope to
Yep.
see you, scare quotes, next week.
All
Take care.
right.